Good morning. I hope everybody has stayed warm. I think we're going to start warming up today. And I think by the weekend, everything is going to be a little bit closer to normal. As the slide says, we're starting the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. And I want to go through the introduction a little bit. And then I think I also just want to take a little bit of time and go back to one of the things from the syllabus where we talked about where it mentions critical thinking, and I want to tie that to critical reading and the purpose of writing as we go. I think the first thing I want to do, though, is I touched on this in the email I sent out on Monday. I'll remember that the final copy of the research paper is due in the Google Drive folder by 11:59 p.m. today. And once again, as I've said many times, I am not going to stay up at 11:59 and see who comes in, but I do want to start correcting tomorrow. Reading, we're going through page 62 today. I believe I actually have one of the quotations from the book from page 62. Friday through page 86. Please note that because of the holiday, I'm doing Group B and Group A, and then the writing lab is on Monday. And then as we're going through until spring break, I think we have writing labs on Monday. Then I believe I flip back to Friday. I may have screwed up in class and not, given the right days. Please refer to the syllabus. That's what I go back to when I check about due dates or when we're supposed to be done with things or when there's going to be a quiz. So please check the syllabus. It's posted on D2L. When I think about critical writing or criticism in general, I think about the bold print that's on this slide. Conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, or evaluating. I am old, and way back in the day when I went and took education classes, these were part of the hierarchy of teaching, and we were supposed to get people away from just retelling into analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating. With the new rubrics, some of those terms have changed, but I think it's the goal. Analysis, if you look at the definition, is a detailed examination of anything complex in order to understand its nature or to determine its essential features, or thorough study. I think a thorough study a lot of times implies that this is something that we can take apart and put back together. And so what we did with the novel a little bit is we took it apart to see whether The Life We Bury fit with any of the basic criteria of a detective novel, whether it was a more traditional, more hard-boiled, or police procedural. And we saw that it used elements of all, but it probably fell more into the hard-boiled than anything else. But as we conceptualize, as we apply, analyze, synthesize, and evaluate, I think the important thing is that we should read with that idea. And if you look at this quotation from What Does Critical Reading Really Mean? The definition of critical reading means reading with the goal of finding a deep understanding of the material, whether it is fiction or nonfiction. And the book we're reading, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, is nonfiction. It is the act of analyzing and evaluating. Notice that those are some of the same terms that we came across with critical thinking. And so, as we're reading, we should be analyzing and evaluating the same way we should be doing anytime we're thinking. We should be analyzing and evaluating. And if we take a look, I think that the highlight here, the bold part, critical reader might read the same work to appreciate how a particular perspective on the events and a particular selection of facts can lead to a particular understanding. That understanding in fiction might be theme, but I think if we're looking at nonfiction, it can also have theme. But here, I think we are going to look at the author's perspective, as opposed to the people she's dealing with, she's interviewing or reporting on or writing a biography of, what their perspective might have been, how she selects the facts, how Skloot selects the facts, and how her selection of the facts can lead us to think about this is the goal she has. I think it's important then to go to how do we link critical writing and critical thinking, okay? And the first thing I think we need to do is the idea that there's a link between reading and thinking. Critical thinking depends on critical reading. You can think critically about a text. After all, only if you understand it. We may choose to accept a presentation, but we must know why. When I talk about claim data, warrant, and writing, the warrant is a why. And I think as we're going through this thing, it's important to understand that throughout this class, when you give me a who or a what, I'm going to ask, why is this important? The second part of the link, then, is again this quotation from Writing as Thinking. We explore how writers' thoughts can be improved when externalized onto paper or some other medium. Notice that it begins with a book is a machine to think with, a pen is a machine to think with. So we're getting at the goal of critical thinking by writing and by reading. And that is the ultimate goal here, to take a look at how these books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, can help us think. And then by helping us think, can help us write. And by helping us write, we can once again think better. Moving on to the book. I think page 7 gives us several things. Number one, the author is inserting herself in this book. The Lax has challenged everything I thought I knew about faith. It's not the story of the HeLa cells and Henrietta Lax, but of Henrietta's family, particularly Deborah, and their lifelong struggle to make peace with the existence of those cells and the science that made them possible. So it begins with the memoir. It is the story of the HeLa cells, so it's a scientific history, perhaps. It's the story of Henrietta Lax, so it's a biography. It's the story of Henrietta's family, makes it a family history. It could perhaps be a biography of Deborah to some degree. And then it's this struggle about the HeLa cells, the fact that these cells apparently can live forever, and how that affects the Lax family. Step 1, it's not a novel. Novels, by definition, should be fiction. This book is not a novel. I'm putting that in bold because ever so often, whether on video or in class, I'm probably going to refer to it as a novel. It's not a novel. And I'll probably correct people on their papers, and I'll probably correct people in class when they talk about it. It's not a novel. And as I just got done saying, it's part biography, it's part family history, it's medical history, it's to some degree investigative reporting, and it's to some degree a memoir of the author's interaction with the Lax family. Even though it's not a novel, I think it's important to understand that some of the things we've talked about for the novel, character, conflict, connection, and theme, they still apply. And some of the things that we talked about characterization, for example, when somebody is just called an enormous, mischievous grown-up kid, that's direct characterization. A reckless visionary is direct characterization. What Skloot does then is develops the term reckless visionary with some ideas such as, filling the lab with the basement, with half-built machines, piles of junkyard scraps only he could imagine using in the lab. That gives us the visionary. I'm not sure it always gives us the reckless, but at least gives us part of that. So remember, anytime in a nonfiction book that there is direct characterization, always look for what are the warrants. This nonfiction book should be doing the same thing you're doing in your papers. It's making a claim he was a reckless visionary, and then it should be going on to some data, and then it should be going on to some warrants. Here's some supporting details. Perhaps his size doesn't necessarily fit in here. I might tell you to move that to a different paragraph if I'm grading the paper or talking about a writing lab. But certainly the winemaking factory exploding and how he dealt with it, the eating 12 ears of corn at one sitting kind of makes him an enormous kid. This paragraph gives me a lot of data and a lot of warrants to back everything up, or at least a lot of data to back everything up. The other thing I think I need to talk about here is the idea of the context of the times. This book is going to be in part about people who were living, 1940s, 1950s. It's a long way from 2021. All right. I mean, just thinking about the fact that I was born in 1957, that my first TV experience was literally fuzzy black and white with an antenna that we sometimes had to go outside to turn, or we had to change clips from the wires coming in from the antenna on the back of the TV to get certain channels to come in. I now have gone through the cable era. I have now cut the cord. I am now streaming everything. It's a far different world just in that little bit of technology. But I think there are other more important cultural things. For example, Henrietta Lacks was born and lived during the era of Jim Crow, during the era of extreme segregation. And I think it's important to understand that we have to look at that, and we have to understand some of the decisions that the family may have made, some of the decisions Henrietta and her husband had to make are colored by, excuse me, are colored by the context of the times. And that just because we would make different decisions now, we're looking at a far different time. I put this quotation in because it struck me that in 1951 there was a lot of optimism. Science believed that cancer can be conquered. And although I think cancer is no longer an immediate death sentence, and thousands, if not millions of people live 5 to 10 to 15 years after a cancer diagnosis, we still haven't conquered it. And again, that's 49, it's almost 70 years ago. 1951 to 2000 was 49 years. You add another 21 for 2021. It's almost 70 years ago, and we still haven't conquered it. We might be winning, but it has not been conquered. And again, I think that's the context of the time. They are a lot more optimistic, I think, than we are. And then finally, some things we take for granted now were things that they different than what they did. Tissue culture is something that just happens now almost automatically. People go in for a biopsy. People go in for all sorts of things, and they take a blood sample. They do all sorts of stuff like that. Now it's just something that we take for granted. But back then it was the stuff of racism, science fiction. It was the Nazis. It was snake oil. In other words, it was something that wasn't going to work. It was selling sugar water for medicine, and no one paid much attention to it. Now, perhaps now we don't pay much attention to it either, but we don't pay much attention to it now because we just take it for granted. And it does strike me that one of the things as we're dealing with the context of the time is as we look at quotations like this, What do we take for granted now? What attitudes do we take for granted now that people 75 years from now or 70 years from now will think weird or evil or wrong? So that's your daily writing. What is one thing we accept as common practice now or believe strongly now that people 75 years from now will find strange or wildly incorrect? It can be a scientific thing, it can be a cultural behavior thing, it can be a lot of other things, but just give me your opinion. What's one thing that we expect, now, accept now, or believe now that people 75 years from now will find wildly strange or wildly incorrect? Okay, I hope everybody has a good day. Uh, those of you who are watching this video, get the comments in the YouTube comments, and we'll see you in class on Friday. And then remember, those of you who will be coming in for the lab on Monday, and after spring break, we'll get back to labs on Friday. Have a good one.